Imagine this: 14 European powers gathered in a grand room in Berlin. On the table before them, a map of Africa. No Africans were invited. No voices from the land they were dividing were heard. And yet, by the end of their meeting, they had carved up an entire continent like a cake shared among empires. This is the story of the scramble for Africa, how greed, power, and politics reshaped a continent, and how its echoes still define modern Africa today. By the late 1800s, Europe was changing fast. The Industrial Revolution had transformed it into a machine hungry for raw materials: cotton, gold, copper, rubber, and ivory. Africa was rich in all of them. Before 1880, European powers controlled less than 10% of Africa, mostly coastal, trading posts. But when King Leopold II of Belgium secretly claimed the Congo in 1882, everything changed. He called it a humanitarian project, but in truth, it was a personal empire built on greed and violence. His actions sent shock waves across Europe. Other nations feared being left out, and so began the race for Africa. To prevent European nations from going to war with each other, Germany's Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, called for a meeting. For 3 months, from November 1884 to February 1885, representatives from Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Belgium, Spain, and others sat in Berlin's Reich Chancellery. They claimed they were bringing order and progress to Africa, but in reality they were dividing it. There were no African leaders in the room, not a single representative from the continent. In that conference, they drafted what became known as the General Act of Berlin, a set of rules for claiming African territory. It introduced the idea of effective occupation, meaning that a country had to physically control an area to claim it. It also declared free trade along the Congo and Niger rivers and banned the slave trade, ironically, after Europe had profited from it for centuries. When the conference ended, the future of Africa had been decided by men who had never set foot on most of its soil. After Berlin, Europe moved quickly. Over the next 30 years, the map of Africa changed completely. Britain seized Egypt, Sudan, South Africa, and Nigeria. France swallowed vast territories in West and Central Africa. Belgium took the Congo, 80 times the size of its own country. Germany claimed parts of today's Tanzania, Namibia, and Cameroon. Portugal kept Angola and Mozambique. Italy snatched Libya, Eritrea, and Somalia. By 1914, 90% of Africa was under European rule. Only 2 nations remained: independent Ethiopia and Liberia. Borders were drawn with straight lines, cutting through over 10,000 ethnic groups and countless languages. Tribes were split apart. Rival kingdoms were forced together. The lines drawn in Berlin would later become the national borders we still see today. The scramble for Africa was not just political, it was brutal. In the Congo Free State, millions of Africans were enslaved to collect rubber. Hands were cut off if quotas weren't met. It's estimated that 10 million people died under Leopold's rule. In German Southwest Africa, modern Namibia, the Herero and Nama people rose up in resistance. Germany responded with extermination orders. Men, women, and children were driven into the desert to die, one of the first genocides of the 20th century. Across the continent, similar stories unfolded. The Ashanti, the Zulu, and the Benin kingdom fought bravely, but machine guns crushed spears. Colonial powers extracted wealth, built railways not for Africans but to carry away Africa's treasures. They preached civilization but brought chains. The Berlin Conference shaped the world we live in today. When African nations began gaining independence in the 1950s and 60s, they inherited borders drawn by strangers, borders that ignored culture, language, and history. Conflicts from Sudan to Nigeria, from Rwanda to the Congo, all trace their roots to those artificial lines. But Africa rose again. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Patrice Lumumba, and Haile Selassie fought to reclaim what Berlin took away: identity, sovereignty, and dignity. The colonial map was redrawn, this time by Africans themselves. The scramble for Africa wasn't just about land, it was about power, greed, and control. But history is not finished. Today, a new generation is rewriting the story, telling it in their own voices, their own way. Africa is not a victim of history, it is the author of the future. If this story inspired you, hit subscribe, like, and share, because these are the stories the world needs to hear. Stories of truth, strength, and resilience.